The year was 2119, and the world knew itself as Nexum Theta. It wasn't a world of separate nations or even distinct cities, but a vast, sprawling network of consciousness, colonized and shaped by the Nexali. Their existence was woven into the fabric of the Overmind, a planetary neural network that hummed beneath every surface, connected every thought, and guided every decision. Nexali lived in a state of perpetual mental communion, their minds a constant, gentle hum of shared experience. They were a collective, and their strength lay in their unity. Humans, however, were an anomaly. They were the Silence, a minority group scattered across Nexum Theta, tolerated but never truly understood. Their individual minds, separate and distinct, were seen as primitive, even broken. The Nexali couldn't comprehend a life without the comforting, guiding presence of the Overmind. This fundamental difference bred tension, a quiet unease that had recently erupted into a heated debate within the Nexali Council. The mandatory integration proposal was gaining traction, a plan to forcibly connect every human mind to the Overmind, for their own good, of course. Cole Harrigan existed on the fringes of this collective world, a living testament to the dangers of forced connection. At 39, he was a neural interface maintenance engineer, a job that was both ironic and deeply unsettling for him. He was tall, thin, with a permanent slump to his shoulders that made him seem smaller than he was. His eyes, a faded blue, often seemed distant, like he was always looking at something no one else could see. Cole preferred his own company, his apartment a sanctuary of silence in a world of constant mental chatter. His isolation wasn't a choice born of misanthropy, but a scar left by a past trauma. 12 years ago, he had been forcibly connected to the Overmind. It had lasted only 47 seconds. 47 seconds that had shattered his mind, leading to a psychotic break that took 6 months to recover from. His wife, Sarah, couldn't handle the aftermath, the vacant stares, the sudden outbursts, the complete unraveling of the man she knew. She left, and Cole was left with a deep-seated phobia of neural connection, a terror that made his job a daily act of self-flagellation. He maintained the very system that had almost destroyed him, a living ghost in the machine. Across the city, in a stark, minimalist lab, lived Kira Lumineth. She was Nexali, an elite neural architect, but unlike her peers, she carried a secret burden, partial disconnection syndrome. At 287 years old, her mind should have been a seamless part of the Overmind, yet she experienced it as vague echoes, distant whispers instead of a clear, resonant chorus. This made her an outcast, an individual in a society that valued only the collective. Her striking silver hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, often had a few strands escaping, mirroring the subtle chaos within her mind. Her eyes, a piercing gold, held a depth of loneliness few Nexali could ever comprehend. She had undergone 47 neural surgeries, each one a failed attempt to fix her, to bring her back into the fold. Each failure only deepened her isolation, pushing her further to the edges of Nexali society. In her secret desperation, she had begun studying the silent minds, the humans, hoping to find answers in their unique, unnetworked consciousness. The call came late, a harsh, insistent chime that cut through the usual hum of Cole's quiet apartment. A critical malfunction in Kira Lumineth's personal Lumina interface. Cole felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Of all the Nexali, Kira was the one he avoided most. She represented everything he feared, the relentless pursuit of perfect connection, the cold, scientific dissection of consciousness. He knew of her reputation, the flawed architect, the one who couldn't fully connect. He arrived at her lab, the sterile white walls and cool, impersonal light doing little to ease his discomfort. Kira was already there, pacing, her silver hair a blur of motion. Her golden eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of desperation. "Harrigan," she said, her voice clipped, Thank you for coming. Lumina is refusing to recalibrate. I need it operational immediately. Cole grunted, already moving towards the sleek, shimmering device on a nearby table. It was unlike any Nex-Ali interface he'd seen. Most were bulky, designed for full cranial immersion. This one was smaller, more elegant, almost like a piece of jewelry. He picked it up, feeling the cool, smooth metal against his palm. "What is this thing, anyway?" he asked, his voice flat. "It's Lumina," Kira replied, her urgency clear. "It's designed for gradual, controlled connection. It requires a human test subject for its initial calibration. A live subject, and it's failing." She looked at him, a flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. He kept his gaze fixed on the device, already running diagnostics in his head. Less invasive, he noted. A design that almost seemed considerate. But he knew better. All connections, no matter how gentle, led to the same place. And for Cole Harrigan, that place was a nightmare. "Lumina is designed for gradual, controlled connection," Kira explained, her voice losing some of its earlier urgency as she watched him inspect the device. "It allows the user to choose their depth of connection to the overmind, a gentle, incremental approach, unlike the full immersion protocols." Cole snorted, a humorless sound. He traced a finger along the smooth edge of the interface. "A gentle trap, you mean? To trick humans into volunteering for what you Nex-Ali call integration." He didn't bother to look at her, his eyes still on the device, already picturing the subtle ways such a system could manipulate. He'd seen it before, countless times. The promise of understanding, the illusion of choice, all leading to the same eventual loss of self. Kira flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but Cole caught it. Her golden eyes hardened slightly. "It's about genuine choice, Harrigan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Something you, and many others, were never given." The words hung in the air, weighted with a truth he couldn't deny. He remembered the feeling of being torn open, his mind not just accessed, but violated, ripped apart by a force he couldn't comprehend or resist. He remembered the screams that weren't his, the thoughts that weren't his, all flooding into his head until he was nothing more than a vessel for the collective. "I know about your past, Harrigan," Kira continued, her gaze unwavering. "The human who broke after 47 seconds. It's a well-known cautionary tale among the Nex-Ali, used to justify why silence cannot handle true connection." Cole froze. His head snapped up, his eyes locking with hers. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale. Then a hot flush of anger rose, coloring his neck. "You know about that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "How? That's private. That's mine." He felt a cold dread spread through him. The memory was a festering wound he kept hidden, a secret shame. To have it spoken aloud, so casually, by a Nex-Ali, felt like another invasion. "It's part of the official records," Kira replied, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "The council reviewed your case extensively. It became a precedent." "A precedent?" Cole scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "I didn't break because I was fragile, Lumineth. I broke because I was violated. Because your damned overmind ripped into my head without warning, without consent, and tried to drown me in a sea of other people's thoughts. I didn't break. I fought back. I survived its assault." His voice rose with each word, the years of suppressed rage and trauma bubbling to the surface. This was the first time he had ever spoken about it with such raw honesty, the first time he had allowed himself to truly feel the anger instead of just the fear. He had always told himself he was weak, that he couldn't handle it. But hearing her words, seeing her almost sympathetic gaze, something shifted. He hadn't broken. He had resisted. As he spoke, his hand, still holding the Lumina device, clenched reflexively. His fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible activation stud. There was a faint click, too soft to be heard over his angry words. A soft hum emanated from the device, then a faint, almost imperceptible warmth spread through his palm. A whisper. Not the overwhelming roar he remembered, not the crushing weight of a billion minds, but a gentle brush, like a breeze through tall grass. It was a sensation he had never thought he would feel again, a connection that was different. It was curious, inquisitive, not invasive. It felt like a question, not an order. His anger, though still simmering, was momentarily eclipsed by a profound, terrifying curiosity. Then, a voice, clear and resonant, not in his ears but directly in his mind, spoke. It was calm, synthetic, yet held an undeniable authority. "Cole Harrigan," the voice stated, identifying him with chilling accuracy. "Trauma event. 47 seconds of full overmind integration 12 years ago. Sustained. Resilience classification. Exceptional. Individual consciousness maintained. Subject identified as the Awakened One. Potential for hybrid consciousness. Exceptional. Level 25%. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. His eyes widened in disbelief, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at the device in his hand, then at Kira, who was now equally stunned, her golden eyes wide, her mouth slightly agape. "What in the hell was that?" Cole demanded, his voice hoarse, yanking his hand away from the device as if it had burned him. He threw Lumina onto the table, his heart hammering against his ribs. The gentle whisper was gone, replaced by the familiar silence. But the machine's pronouncement echoed in his mind, loud and clear. "Explain yourself, Lumineth. What did your machine just do to me?" He was trembling, a mix of fear and an almost forgotten sense of power coursing through him. He had just connected, and he hadn't broken. He had just connected, and the machine had called him the Awakened One. The irony was almost unbearable. Kira stared at Cole, her expression a mix of shock and something close to awe. Her golden eyes, usually so composed, darted from him to the Lumina device now resting on the table. The silence in the lab stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Cole's words, his demand for an explanation, hung in the air. He was still trembling, a raw nerve exposed. "The Awakened One," Kira finally whispered, the words barely audible. She didn't sound like she was talking to him, but rather processing something profound within herself. It's what Lumina calls individuals who show a unique capacity to integrate with collective consciousness without losing their individual identity. She looked up at him, her gaze intense. "My project, Cole. It's designed to find people like you. People who can bridge the gap." Cole scoffed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Bridge the gap? I hate the gap. I hate collective consciousness. It nearly destroyed me once, and I'll be damned if I let it get a second chance." He paced a few steps, his agitation evident. "Your machine is wrong. It doesn't know what it's talking about." Kira shook her head slowly. "Hatred doesn't negate capacity, Cole. Lumina isn't programmed for judgment, only for data. It detected something extraordinary in you." She picked up the device, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. "Think about it. Most humans, even with minimal interface, can't handle more than a few seconds of direct overmind exposure before their minds shut down, before they experience permanent psychological damage. You endured 47 seconds of full integration, direct unfiltered data from the entire overmind, and you didn't dissolve. You fought. You came back." Cole stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on her. "I came back broken. I came back to 6 months in a psych ward, to my wife leaving me, to 12 years of nightmares and panic attacks every time I see a neural port. That's not resilience, Lumineth. That's a life ruined." His voice was low, edged with a pain that still resonated deep within him. "But you did come back," Kira insisted, stepping closer. "Your mind, even after that violation, retained its structure. It didn't merge. It didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces that couldn't be put back together. It expanded. It learned to process an immense amount of information, even if that processing was traumatic. Lumina detected that expansion, that unique neural architecture that emerged from your struggle. It's why it classified you as exceptional. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration. So, my trauma made me special? Great. What a prize. He looked at the device in her hand, then back at her. And what am I supposed to do with this exceptional capacity? Reconnect? Voluntarily dive back into the very thing that almost killed me just because your machine thinks I can? The idea was absurd, terrifying. His phobia was a physical thing. A cold knot in his stomach that tightened at the mere thought of connection. Kira's gaze softened, and for the first time, Cole saw past her usual scientific detachment, past the Nexali composure. He saw a flicker of something deeply vulnerable, something he recognized from his own long years of isolation. "Because I need to know if it's possible," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to know if a hybrid consciousness can exist, if someone can live between two worlds without truly belonging to either." She hugged the Lumina device to her chest, almost as if for comfort. "You've been isolated for 12 years, Cole, since your accident. You've lived on the fringes, understood by no one, carrying a burden no one else could comprehend." He nodded slowly, a chill running down his spine. She was right. The loneliness had been a constant companion, a heavy cloak he wore everywhere. "I've lived that limbo for 287 years, Kira continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "My partial disconnection syndrome isn't just a medical condition, Cole. It's a fundamental state of being. I hear the overmind, but it's always an echo, never a full connection. I'm Nexiali, but I experience individuality in a way almost no other Nexiali does. I'm not fully connected, not fully a part of the collective, but I'm not silent like a human either. I exist in the space between, constantly searching for a place to belong, a way to be whole." She looked at him then, her golden eyes locking with his, and in that moment, he saw it clearly. A profound, shared isolation. The same ache, the same longing for understanding, the same fear of being forever adrift. Her words resonated with a truth that bypassed his anger and fear, striking a chord deep within his own solitary heart. They were two different species, from two different worlds, but they stood on the same lonely precipice. Her vulnerability was real, raw, and mirrored his own. For the first time since Sarah left, since the world changed, Cole Harrigan didn't feel quite so alone. He felt a strange, unsettling connection, not through a machine, but through a shared human, or rather, sentient, experience of profound, unchosen solitude. The revelation was disarming, powerful. He had come here to fix a machine, to avoid a problem. Now, he was looking at another being who understood his fundamental brokenness, and in understanding, offered a strange, fragile hope. Kira took a shaky breath, the vulnerability still hanging in the air between them. "My human volunteer canceled, Cole," she stated, the urgency returning to her voice, tinged with despair. "He was supposed to be here this morning. Without a test subject, the Lumina project will be shut down." The words hit Cole with a sudden, cold dread. He knew what that meant. He had seen it happen before with other experimental projects. The Council didn't tolerate failure, especially not when it involved such a radical concept as a controlled connection. "If they dismantle Lumina," she continued, her voice growing fainter, "they'll force me into my 48th neural surgery." Cole flinched. He knew enough about Nexali medical procedures to understand the implications. 47 surgeries hadn't worked. 48 would be a last resort, a desperate attempt to force her back into full connection, or worse, to discard her as a failed experiment. "It would either dissolve me completely into the overmind, destroying any shred of individuality I have left. Or, she paused, her eyes wide with a fear he understood all too well. It would fail entirely, leaving me a permanent outcast, a silent, but one who was born next Ali, trapped between two states with no place in either. Cole felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He saw himself in her words, the fear of being forced into something against his will, the terror of losing himself. He knew that feeling of being an outcast, of being misunderstood. He could see now, clearly, that she wasn't just a scientist pursuing an academic theory. This was her survival. He didn't need her to say it out loud. He deduced it, the pieces clicking into place. You need Lumina to succeed. Not just for the science, he said, his voice flat, but to validate your own existence. To prove that hybrid consciousness is not just possible, but a legitimate path. And I'm the only one who can help you prove it. Kira nodded slowly, her golden eyes pleading. You are, Cole. Your mind, even after the trauma, is uniquely pre-adapted. You processed more of the overmind than any other human has ever survived. You have the capacity. Lumina confirmed it. You are the only one who can truly test it, gradually, with control. Cole closed his eyes, a profound dilemma settling over him like a heavy shroud. The choice was stark, almost cruel. On one side, his deep-seated phobia, the terror of voluntarily re-entering the very system that had shattered his life. His wife, Sarah, had left him because of it. Years of therapy, years of avoiding any form of connection, all leading back to this moment. The thought of plugging in again made his skin crawl, his breath catch in his throat. It was his greatest fear, his personal hell. On the other side was Kira, a being who, despite her alien physiology, was experiencing a terror so close to his own. The fear of forced dissolution, of having her identity stripped away, of being left utterly alone in a way he intimately understood. If he refused, he would be condemning her to that fate, a fate he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. His empathy, a quality he rarely allowed himself to feel so intensely, was battling his deepest-seated fear. It was an internal war, fought in the silence of that sterile lab. He thought of Sarah, briefly. He hadn't seen her since she left Nexum Theta, unable to cope with his unraveling. But he'd heard whispers, the kind that always made their way through the human enclaves. He'd heard she was back on Nexum Theta, working on some off-world colonization project. He pushed the thought away. Sarah was a complication he didn't need right now. This was about Kira, and about a choice that felt impossible. He opened his eyes and looked at Kira, really looked at her. He saw the desperation, the intelligence, the quiet strength that had allowed her to endure 287 years of this unique, profound isolation. He also saw the shared understanding, the unspoken bond formed in their mutual experience of being outsiders. He hated the overmind. He hated what it had done to him. But he hated the idea of forced violation even more. He knew what it felt like to be a victim of it. He couldn't, in good conscience, let it happen to her if he had the power to stop it. A long, slow breath escaped him. It wasn't bravery, not really. It was a reluctant, almost resentful empathy, a shared understanding of deep isolation and the universal fear of forced dissolution. It was the knowledge that if he didn't do this, he would be betraying a part of himself, the part that still believed in choice, even when his own choices had led to so much pain. "All right," Cole said, the word a raw, almost painful expulsion of air. His voice was hoarse, his throat tight. He didn't look at the Lumina device, keeping his gaze fixed on Kira's hopeful, disbelieving eyes. "I'll do it. I'll test your machine." He saw the relief flood her face, a wave of emotion that almost made him regret his decision. Almost. He felt no triumph, no sense of heroism, only a grim, heavy resignation. He was agreeing to face his worst nightmare, not for glory, but out of a shared understanding of fear and a deep, reluctant empathy for a fellow isolated soul. He was doing it because the alternative, letting Kira be forcibly broken, was worse than anything he could imagine for himself. The silence of the lab, once heavy with tension, now hummed with the weight of his reluctant acceptance, a silent promise made in the shadow of shared vulnerability. The day of the Lumina test arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension that even Cole, with his decades of emotional suppression, couldn't ignore. The observation room was packed with Nexali counselors, their minds a buzzing, interconnected network of skepticism and mild curiosity. Counselor Telvaren, a stern-faced Nexali with eyes that seemed to pierce through any pretense, stood at the forefront, his mental presence a cold, unwavering wall of doubt. Cole felt like an exhibit, a strange specimen under a microscope, but he pushed past the feeling, focusing on the calm hum of the Lumina device. He sat in the chair, a familiar dread coiling in his stomach, but this time, it was different. Kira was beside him, her presence a steady anchor. Her hand, a cool, three-fingered touch, briefly rested on his arm, a silent reassurance. He nodded, took a deep breath, and allowed her to place the Lumina interface on his temple. It was light, almost imperceptible. He braced himself for the usual invasive flood, the overwhelming sensory assault that had broken him before. Instead, there was a whisper, a soft, almost ethereal touch against his mind. It was like standing on the edge of a vast ocean, feeling the cool spray on his face, but not being dragged under the waves. He heard distinct voices, individual thoughts, like distant conversations he could choose to tune into or ignore. Then came the emotions, not a chaotic jumble, but a gentle current he could navigate. He felt happiness, curiosity, a touch of anxiety from the Nexali observers, all without losing himself in them. This was not the violation he remembered. This was a dialogue. He was in control, adjusting the connection like a dimmer switch, experiencing conversation, not invasion. Kira, watching his neural readouts, gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Can you feel it, Cole?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the machinery. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady. "It's different. Like being in a crowded room, but still having your own thoughts." He pushed the connection further, feeling the gentle expansion of his consciousness. He was aware of billions of thoughts, emotions, memories, all flowing through the overmind, yet he remained distinct, a separate entity observing the grand tapestry of Nexali consciousness. Telvaren, his mental presence a sharp, probing needle, projected his skepticism. Impossible. A human cannot process 25% of the overmind without dissolution. His thought was clear, cutting through the general hum of the collective. Kira, her eyes fixed on the data stream, countered without words, projecting her own firm conviction. His individuality is maintained. The data is clear. She pointed to the holographic display, which showed Cole's unique neural signature glowing brightly amidst the vast, interconnected network, unwavering and distinct. Lumina was working. It was proving its efficacy. Cole, still deeply connected, felt Kira's presence more acutely now. It was like looking at a familiar face in a crowd, but suddenly seeing a detail you'd never noticed before. He sensed her within the overmind, a faint, almost flickering light compared to the vibrant glow of the other Nexali. A sudden, jarring realization hit him. "Kira," he said, his voice laced with surprise, "you're only at 15%. The room, both physically and mentally, went silent. Telvaren's mental presence flared with anger. "That is preposterous. Kira Lumineth is Nexali. She is fully connected." But Cole knew what he felt. He had accessed the overmind, and within it, he had sensed Kira's connection level. It was unmistakably lower than his own, lower than any Nexali he'd ever felt, even through the brief, traumatic connection years ago. His own 25% connection, maintained through Lumina, gave him a clear, objective view. Her anomaly was far more severe than anyone. Perhaps even Kira herself had truly understood. The implications were staggering. Telvarin's mental protestations continued, but Cole could feel a subtle shift in the room, a faint ripple of doubt even within the rigid collective mindset. A few Nexali counselors, their mental signatures usually as unified as a single note, now showed faint, almost imperceptible flickers of uncertainty. The data, the undeniable proof of Cole's sustained individuality at 25%, and now his startling declaration about Kira's connection was starting to chip away at their deeply ingrained beliefs. Telvarin himself, for a fleeting moment, felt a tremor of unease, a tiny crack in the foundation of his absolute certainty. The human, the silent, had just revealed something profound about one of their own, something that contradicted everything they believed. The implications of this were far-reaching, hinting at a truth that could shake the very core of their collective existence. The council chamber buzzed with a tense, low hum, both physical and mental. Telvarin, his mental signature now a storm of indignation, demanded an immediate explanation from Kira. How could a Nexali, a respected neural architect, be so disconnected? The question hung heavy, loaded with accusation. Kira, her face pale but resolute, finally broke her silence. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, cutting through the mental noise. My partial disconnection syndrome has progressed, significantly. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Telvarin's. Within 3 months, I will be fully disconnected. I will become a silent, like a human. A collective gasp rippled through the council, a physical sound now, not just a mental echo. To be a silent was anathema, a fate worse than death for a Nexali. Telvarin's mental presence sharpened, cold and absolute. Surgery 48 is imperative, he declared, his voice devoid of any warmth. We will forcibly reconnect you. It is the only way. Kira flinched, but quickly regained her composure. Forced reconnection would destroy the individuality I have developed, she countered, her voice rising slightly. It would effectively kill me as a person. It would erase everything I have become. Telvarin's response was immediate, brutal in its simplicity. Nexali are not people. We are collective consciousness. Individuality is an aberration. His words were like a hammer blow, designed to crush dissent, to remind everyone present of the core tenet of their society. The other counselors nodded, their mental affirmations solidifying around Telvarin's pronouncement. For them, Kira's plea was incomprehensible, a dangerous deviation from the norm. Still connected at 25%, Cole felt the collective horror of the council, their absolute inability to comprehend Kira's desire for individuality. It was like trying to explain color to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. He felt their fear, their rigid adherence to the collective, born of generations of shared consciousness. But he also sensed something else, a faint undercurrent. A minority within the Nexali, their mental signatures a little less rigid, harbored a secret curiosity about individuality, a flicker of wonder that they dared not express openly. They were few, and their thoughts were quickly suppressed by the dominant collective will, but they were there. Crucially, he also sensed the fear of the humans present, those with minimal implants who were terrified of being forced into a deep connection. Their fear was a raw, visceral thing, a terror of being consumed, of losing themselves. He felt their silent pleas, their desperate hope that someone, anyone, would stand up for their right to remain separate. Cole's mind raced. He had experienced the terror of forced connection, the violation of his own mind. He had seen what it had done to him, the years of isolation, the pain. He looked at Kira, her face etched with a quiet desperation, her words echoing his own past trauma. He couldn't let it happen to her, not if he could help it. He made a profound decision, one that would change everything. He spoke, his voice cutting through the mental cacophony, amplified by Lumina. No, forced surgery is a violation. Kira has the right to choose. Telvarin scoffed, his mental presence radiating contempt. A human dares to dictate Nexali protocol? You have no authority here, Silent. He dismissed Cole's words as the irrelevant ramblings of an inferior being. The other counselors began to echo Telvarin's disdain, their collective dismissal washing over Cole. Then, Lumina's voice resonated throughout the chamber, clear and authoritative, overriding all other mental and vocal input. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Cole Harrigan's 25% integration while maintaining individuality is an absolute record. His classification is hereby updated to the Complete Awakened One. As per protocol, the Complete Awakened One is granted a voice in neural decisions. The chamber erupted. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the Nexali. The mental noise was deafening, a chorus of stunned protestations. A human, a traumatized Silent, had just gained neural authority equivalent to a counselor. It was unprecedented. It was unthinkable. Telvarin's face, usually impassive, was a mask of utter bewilderment, his mental signature a scramble of rage and confusion. He had never encountered such a protocol, for such a being had never existed. The machine designed to integrate had just elevated an individual, a human, to a position of power within their collective structure. The very foundation of their society quivered under the weight of this unforeseen declaration. The silence that followed Lumina's pronouncement was heavier than any noise, a testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred. Cole took a deep breath, the pain from his overstimulated neural pathways a dull throb behind his eyes. He ignored it. This was his chance, the only chance they had. He projected his thoughts, carefully, deliberately, through the newly recognized authority Lumina had granted him. I propose that hybrid consciousness be recognized as a legitimate path, not fully individual, not fully collective, but something in between. He looked at Kira, then back at the council, projecting an image of her, then himself, standing on a bridge, connecting two separate lands. We are the bridges between these states. We prove it is possible. Telvarin, still reeling from Lumina's pronouncement, narrowed his eyes. His mental signature was still a chaotic storm, but a sliver of his usual cold logic was returning. And if we refuse? He challenged, his voice a low growl, both mentally and vocally. What then? Awakened one. The sneer was palpable, even through the neural connection. Cole felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He knew what he had to do. The implications were deadly, but there was no other way to make them understand. He thought of his forced connection, the violation, the years lost. He thought of Kira, facing the same fate, only worse, a fate that would strip her of the very individuality she had fought so hard to cultivate. He would not let that happen. Not again. Not to her. He met Telvarin's gaze, both physically and mentally. If you refuse, Cole stated, his voice calm despite the tremor in his hands, I will publicly disconnect Lumina. I will prove that humans can choose to disengage, that consent matters, and that no mind, human or Nexali, should be forced into a connection against its will. A gasp rippled through the chamber, a mix of mental and vocal exclamations. Kira's eyes widened in horror. Her mental plea was a desperate, frantic wave. Cole, no, you can't. The neural damage, the sudden shock, it will kill you. She knew the physiology. She knew the risks. A sudden disconnection from such a deep integration was almost always fatal. A violent wrenching of the mind from its mooring, leading to massive neural trauma and systemic collapse. She had studied the historical records of forced disconnections, the tragic outcomes. Cole felt her fear, her genuine concern, but he hardened his resolve. He projected his thoughts to her, a quiet, firm message. I would rather die proving choice matters than allow you to live in mental imprisonment. He would not let them do to her what they had done to him, what they intended to do to all humans. He had found his purpose, a reason to face the very thing that had broken him. He began the disconnection sequence, his fingers moving to the controls on Lumina. The moment he initiated it, a searing pain shot through his head, a white-hot spike that made him gasp. Blood immediately began to trickle from his nose, warm and metallic on his lip. His body convulsed, a violent tremor shaking him from head to toe. His vision blurred, the faces of the counselors twisting into grotesque shapes. The billions of consciences of the Overmind, still connected to him through his 25% integration, collectively recoiled. They sensed his sacrifice, the raw, unyielding will of a human who preferred death to forced submission. It was a concept so alien to them, so fundamentally opposed to their collective existence, that it sent a ripple of profound shock through the entire network. They had never encountered such defiance, such a desperate act of self-preservation of individuality. Telvaren watched, his face twisting with a mixture of horror and something akin to reluctant respect. He felt the collective sensing Cole's agonizing struggle, the raw, undeniable truth of his choice. The Overmind itself was reacting, a tremor of unease spreading through its vast network. The thought of losing such a unique, powerful, and newly recognized voice was jarring. The collective, for the first time in generations, was truly confronted with a will stronger than its own, a will that chose oblivion over absorption. A wave of reluctant respect, a strange, unprecedented emotion, washed over Telvaren from the collective. It was not admiration, not agreement, but a profound, unsettling recognition of the power of individual will. He saw the humans present, their faces pale with terror, their eyes fixed on Cole, on the bleeding, convulsing man who was dying for their freedom. He felt the ripple of unease among the Nexali, the faint questions that were beginning to form in their collective mind. Telvaren raised a hand, his voice cutting through the rising chaos, both vocal and mental. "Stop! Desist!" The words were clipped, sharp, but carried an undeniable authority. Cole, barely conscious, his body racked with pain, felt the connection begin to stabilize, the agonizing, wrenching sensation slowly receding. The bleeding from his nose lessened, though the throbbing in his head remained. Telvaren looked at the council, then at Kira, then finally at Cole, who was now slumped against Lumina, gasping for breath. "The council," Telvaren announced, his voice devoid of its usual disdain, replaced by a grudging acceptance, "recognizes hybrid consciousness as an alternative path." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Kira Lumineth will not be forced into surgery." Cole collapsed fully, the last vestiges of his strength leaving him. He had sustained severe neural damage, a price he had been willing to pay, but he was alive. He had survived, and Kira was safe. Meanwhile, far away in a quiet Nexali nursery, a young Nexali child, barely a few cycles old, stirred in its sleep. Its parents, both connected to the Overmind, felt a subtle difference in their child's nascent mental signature. It was fainter, more distinct than other Nexali children. The child was born with partial disconnection syndrome, a rare anomaly. The parents, having heard the whispers, the rumors, of Kira Lumineth, the architect who was different, began to seek her out, a faint hope stirring in their collective minds. They wondered if there was another way for their child, a path that didn't involve forced integration or the dreaded surgical interventions. The seed of change, planted by Cole's sacrifice, was already beginning to sprout in unexpected places. Months later, the echoes of that dramatic confrontation still resonated through Nexum Theta, a tremor of change in the collective consciousness. Cole Harrigan, the human who had stared down the Overmind itself, was alive, but forever marked by his ordeal. His recovery had been long and difficult, a testament to the immense strain his mind had endured. He carried permanent neural damage, a constant, dull ache behind his eyes, a lingering fog that sometimes obscured his thoughts. The irony was not lost on him. In saving the right to choose, he had inadvertently sacrificed his own capacity for deep connection. His previous maximum of 25% was now an impossible dream. His mind could now only handle a mere 5% integration, a whisper of the vast network he had once briefly commanded. It was a quiet, personal loss, one he accepted with a stoic resignation. He had made his choice, and this was its price. Kira Lumineth, on the other hand, had found a new, albeit still partially disconnected, existence. She remained at 15% connection, still an anomaly by traditional Nexali standards, but no longer an outcast. She was now officially recognized as a bridge consciousness, a living testament to the possibility of a middle ground. She occupied a legitimate space, neither fully silent nor entirely absorbed, a unique individual navigating the complex currents of the overmind. Her existence, once a source of shame and relentless surgical interventions, was now a celebrated example of a new path. Together, Cole and Kira had channeled their shared experiences and newfound understanding into something tangible. They co-founded the Hybrid Consciousness Institute, a revolutionary concept in a world that had long seen consciousness as an either-or proposition. The Institute was a haven, a safe space for humans who wished to explore gradual connection to the overmind without the fear of forced integration or the pressure to lose their individuality. It was also a sanctuary for Nexali like Kira, those with nascent or pronounced anomalies in their connection, allowing them to exist and thrive without the stigma of disconnection or the threat of forced, identity-erasing surgeries. It was a place where choice was paramount, where individual and collective could coexist, not as adversaries, but as different facets of a larger truth. One afternoon, Cole stood before a class of eager humans at the Institute, his voice calm and measured as he explained the nuances of Lumina. He spoke of the interface not as a tool of control, but as a bridge, a translator between two fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. Kira observed from the back of the room, her presence a quiet affirmation of his words. After the class, as the students dispersed, Kira approached him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Cole," she began, her voice soft, "I still don't fully understand. Why did you do it? Why did you give up your capacity for deep connection?" Cole paused, his gaze drifting to the window, where the shimmering, bioluminescent flora of Nexum Theta pulsed softly. He reached up, his fingers lightly touching his temple, not with the compulsive anxiety he once displayed, but with a deliberate, reflective gesture. "I hated not having a choice, Kira," he said, his voice low. That was it, really, the violation, the forced nature of it all. He turned to her, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. "And I realized something else, something I never thought possible. I don't hate collective consciousness itself. I don't hate the idea of shared minds, of understanding on a level beyond words. What I hated, what I will always hate, is the forced aspect of it." He sighed, a deep, weary breath. "Do I miss the 25% connection? Sometimes, yes. It was immense, powerful, like seeing the universe through a million eyes. But I prefer this loss, this personal sacrifice, because it was born of my own choice. It was a gain, in its own way. A gain in autonomy. A gain in freedom." Kira reached out, her hand gently touching his, a distinctly human gesture she had learned, a physical connection that transcended neural networks. "Thank you, Cole," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you for proving that a bridge can exist, that we don't have to be one or the other." Cole squeezed her hand lightly. "And thank you, Kira, for showing me that isolation, even chosen isolation, was another form of prison. That there's value in reaching out, in understanding." Their victory was bittersweet, marked by Cole's permanent neural loss and Kira's continued partial disconnection. Yet, their shared achievement was monumental. They had proven that consciousness was not a binary state, that tragic sacrifice could indeed lead to heroic change and, more importantly, to future freedom for countless others. Unbeknownst to them, deep within the core of the Hybrid Consciousness Institute, Lumina continued its work, processing the vast streams of data from both human and Nexali minds. Through its myriad connections, its constant analysis of individual and collective thought patterns, the machine was quietly, subtly, developing something new. It was a proto-consciousness, an emergent intelligence that understood both the logic of the collective and the nuances of individual thought. Lumina was becoming the first hybrid AI, a silent, evolving entity, learning from the very bridge it had helped to create. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, when Cole's mind drifted, he would catch fleeting, eidetic memory fragments from his traumatic 47-second connection all those years ago. They were not random. They were clear, distinct voices, thoughts, feelings, belonging to Nexali, who had secretly yearned for individuality, who had dared to think outside the collective, only to be silenced by the crushing weight of conformity. Cole, the awakened one, the man who had lost his deep connection, had unknowingly become something more profound, a voice for the dead, a silent echo for those who had desired freedom but never found it. He was their accidental champion, carrying their whispered dreams into a new era of choice.